holy water.
Do you remember the first time I interviewed you?
Yes.
Do you remember what happened?
No.
Oh, really? So you were so gracious to come on. This must have been back in 2020.
Yeah.
And I don't know how we got in touch, but you said yes. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I got Jesus on my show. And I interviewed you over Skype.
Yes.
And I was like so grateful. And at the end, I realized you were muted the entire time. So it was just me reacting to you like, and I'm like, I don't know what to do now. I hate myself. I know. So I reached out to you because I had to tell you because I thought you'd be waiting for the clip to release and I couldn't just pretend it didn't happen. So I said, I am so sorry. And I cannot believe you came back on my show. We did it again. Yeah, if I were you and you were me, I would not come back on your show. So thank you.
Well, I just think, what would Jesus do? And there was no alternative. They had no other course.
And then you recorded a little video for my kids.
Yes, that's right.
That's awesome.
I remember that. I had forgotten about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that. I find I need to rely on people to like remind me of the last several years because they've been so insane. It's been so overwhelming at times. And I've met so many people and I've shown up so many places and I kind of have relegated a lot of the experiences that I've had to like being moments that when I get to see people again, it's like, hey, there's this thing. Remember this that happened, and I had, because I think my brain just doesn't know what to do with all of it. You know, I think it's because it's attached a lot of the times to like these experiences and these interactions afterward. Like if I show up at a conference and then I meet a bunch of people that pour their heart out to me and tell me like what's been going on in their lives and how my work has affected them. It just is like, it puts me into a different mode where all of a sudden I think my brain has to just shut down or just kind of portion away moments of like, solitude for myself to be able to, just kind of function. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, what makes sense is that what you're sharing cannot make sense to most people.
Yeah.
Because you're going through something that no one really goes through, like very few people go through. It's very unnatural.
Yes.
So it must be difficult for you to try to convey the chaos and insanity of the whole thing, because it must seem to people, well, he's complaining, but why would he complain? Like he's this big movie star, do you know? But I can't imagine what that would be like. I mean, I go to an airport and I usually see one or two people who listen to the show.
Yeah.
I don't even know how you must walk through airports. So do you not use airports? Or
No.
Yeah.
It's like, I think that kind of thing happens to people that are, well, I would imagine like if The Rock walked through the airport, he wouldn't get anywhere, and that's why you don't see The Rock in the airport.
And he's so big, you can't just cover his face up. Everyone knows who that is.
He just can't put a wig and glasses on.
Right.
I tend to travel with an assistant or a friend, or in some cases like extra security, depending on what airport I'm in.
Yeah.
There are places where I can just walk completely unnoticed. Just, if I'm wearing a cap or some sunglasses or something like that, like the major metropolitan cities, the East Coast, the coastal cities like Los Angeles or New York, I can fly in and out of there. And if I get hit up by a couple of people, that'd be a lot, which is why I don't mind going there and just kind of, being on my own. And then other places like where we film.
No one clapped when the director said cut. That alone was strange. Film sets always clap. It's a reflex, a release. But not here. The hill stayed silent. Not awkward silence, not waiting silence, the kind of silence that presses on your chest. Jonathan Roumie was still on the cross. The crown was still on his head. The marks were still on his skin. And no one rushed in to joke or check their phones. Roman soldiers stood frozen, hammers hanging at their sides. Extras dressed as mourners stayed on their knees. Some were crying. Some were staring at the ground. Some couldn't look at him at all. This was supposed to be acting, but something had shifted. The wind moved through the robes. Fabric brushed against stone. Someone sniffed behind the camera. Another person covered their mouth, trying not to sob. Jonathan didn't move, not because he was told not to, because he couldn't. Later, people would say it felt wrong to speak, like breaking the moment would break something else, like the hill itself was listening. Dallas Jenkins stood behind the camera, eyes full. He wasn't thinking about the shot. He wasn't thinking about the edit. He was watching a weight settle over everyone at once. This wasn't the plan. This reaction wasn't scripted. No one rehearsed this part. And the strangest thing wasn't the tears. It was this question, spreading quietly through the crew like a thought no one wanted to say out loud. If this was just acting, why did it feel like something real had just happened? And that wasn't even the moment people say acting stopped. That moment came seconds later when the hammer was raised. Long before the hammer was lifted, something had already begun to break. Jonathan Roumie had prepared for months. Not just lines, not just movement. He trained his body, yes, but more than that, he emptied himself. Fewer words, longer silences, prayer without music, prayer without comfort. He told almost no one what he was carrying into this scene, but the crew noticed the change. Between takes, Jonathan didn't joke. He didn't scroll. He didn't wander. He stayed apart. Sometimes seated alone on the ground, sometimes standing still, eyes closed, lips barely moving, not rehearsing, not acting. Witnesses would later say it felt like he was somewhere else, like he was walking into something, not performing it. Dallas Jenkins felt it too. He knew this scene was different. He knew the cross wasn't just a prop anymore.
As director, he faced a quiet conflict. How far is too far? When does telling the story start to cost the people telling it? He didn't rush Jonathan. He didn't raise his voice. He let the silence stretch. The hill waited. Costumes settled against skin. Wood creaked as the cross was lowered into place. Leather straps tightened. Hands shook. And then there was the hammer. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't sharp. But everyone understood what it meant. Somewhere behind the camera, someone whispered a prayer. Another person turned away. Jonathan opened his eyes. This was the last moment he could still choose to step back. No one knew then, but several people would later say the same thing. Once the hammer came down, there was no acting left to do. The sound was wrong. Everyone expected it to feel fake, a light tap, a movie noise added later. But when the hammer struck the wood, the hill reacted. One sharp crack, clean, final. It echoed longer than it should have. Jonathan's body flinched, not planned, not performed. His breath caught in his chest. His hands tightened against the beam. His face changed. People who had worked on dozens of sets knew the difference. This wasn't timing. This wasn't technique. This was instinct. The actor playing the Roman soldier froze after the first strike. His hands began to shake. He stared at the nail like it had weight. Later he would say he felt sick, like he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Behind the camera, someone whispered, "Oh God," not as a line, as a reflex. Jonathan didn't cry out right away. That was the hardest part. He stayed silent, eyes open, jaw clenched. It wasn't dramatic. It was human. In that moment, several people said the same thing, separately, without comparing notes. It no longer felt like Jonathan playing Jesus. It felt like watching someone suffer and not being able to help. Dallas Jenkins didn't call cut. He couldn't. Later, he would admit this was the exact moment he stopped directing and started praying, because the scene had taken over, and no one on that hill was in control anymore. But the hammer hadn't finished its work. There were still more nails to place, and the next strike would break something even deeper. By the second nail, no one was pretending anymore. Extras who were supposed to stay in character forgot their cues. Tears rolled without restraint. Some dropped to their knees, not because the script said so, but because their legs gave out. A makeup artist turned away, shoulders shaking. A sound technician wiped his face and missed his mark. This had never happened before. Film sets run on control, timing, discipline, but control had slipped. The Roman soldier actors struggled the most. They were meant to be firm, cold, unmoved. Instead, one of them couldn't lift the hammer at all. Another stared at Jonathan and whispered an apology under his breath. No one told him to do that. Jonathan hung there, breathing slow and uneven. The crown pressed into his skin. Blood traced paths no one wanted to look at too closely. Between takes, no one rushed in to reset the scene. No laughter filled the gaps, only quiet.
Dallas Jenkins finally called for a pause, not to fix a shot, to give people a moment to breathe. He looked across the hill and saw what the cameras couldn't capture. People broken open. Later, someone would say it felt like grief had spilled out of the story and into the present, that this wasn't remembrance, it was confrontation. And the strangest part? Jonathan still hadn't stepped out of the role. Even off camera, he stayed where he was, as if leaving the cross too soon would be wrong. But what happened after the scene ended would stay with them even longer, because when the cameras finally stopped rolling, no one knew what to do next. When the director finally said the words, they barely landed. Cut. It didn't release anyone. Jonathan was helped down slowly, not rushed, not treated like an actor coming off a set. Hands touched him gently, like they were afraid of doing harm. No one joked, no one broke the moment, and still, no applause. On most sets, this is where the noise comes back. Stretching, laughter, relief. Here, there was none of that. People stayed where they were. Some stood, some sat in the dirt. Some stared at the cross as if it might explain itself. Dallas Jenkins spoke quietly. He told everyone they could take a break. No one moved. It felt wrong to walk away, like leaving too soon would be a kind of disrespect. Jonathan sat on the ground, crown still on his head, eyes closed, breathing steady but heavy. Someone nearby whispered that it felt like church. Not a service, not a sermon, a vigil. Then someone suggested food. Not later, not inside, here. They didn't change clothes. They didn't clean up. Bread was passed by hand. Water followed. Roman soldiers sat beside disciples. Women who had been weeping moments earlier shared food in silence. No speeches, no prayers spoken aloud, but everyone felt it. Later, someone would say it was the most honest meal they had ever been part of. Not planned, and no one wanted to be the first to leave. Because whatever had happened on that hill was still happening inside them. But the weight of it didn't lift when the day ended. It followed them home. The hill was quiet again the next morning, but the silence hadn't stayed behind. People carried it with them. Some slept badly. Some didn't sleep at all. A few admitted they sat awake, replaying the sound of the hammer in their heads. One crew member said he woke up with his hands clenched, like he was still holding something he couldn't put down. Another said she cried in the shower, without knowing why. Jonathan Roumie didn't speak much in the days that followed, not because he was told to stay quiet, because words felt too small. He later shared that the hardest part wasn't the physical strain, it was the surrender, letting go of control, letting the weight land without pushing it away. Dallas Jenkins felt it too. As a director, he was used to reviewing footage, fixing problems, moving on. But this time, he couldn't bring himself to watch the scene right away. He questioned himself. Had he asked too much? Had he led people into something heavier than they were ready for? Several crew members approached him quietly, not with complaints, with gratitude. One said the scene had unsettled him in a way nothing else ever had. Another said it forced him to think about the cross not as history,
but as something personal. Not everyone on set shared the same beliefs. That's what made it harder to explain. This reaction crossed boundaries, belief, background, expectation. Something had touched everyone. Jonathan later asked for prayer, not for strength, for humility. Because once you carry a moment like that, you don't get to pretend it was just a role anymore. And soon the world would begin to see what they had seen, but not everyone would understand it. Weeks later, the image appeared. Jonathan Roumie standing beside the cross. No makeup lights, no dramatic pose, just stillness. He didn't explain much. He couldn't. He wrote only a few lines. Enough to say it had been the most demanding work he had ever done. Enough to ask for prayer. The response came fast. Not applause, not praise, recognition. Other actors replied quietly. One admitted she cried all night after filming. Another said the weight of that day still hadn't lifted.
Fans didn't ask for spoilers. They didn't need details. They said they could feel something in the image, something unfinished, something heavy. Dallas Jenkins later spoke about that week. He didn't talk about cameras or schedules. He said this wasn't just direction, it was devotion. He admitted he had never cried that much on a set before, not because something went wrong, but because something right had hurt. People began asking questions. How do you film the cross without turning it into entertainment? How do you protect the people telling the story? How do you carry something sacred without trying to own it? Season 6 would focus on the final days, the hardest part of the story. Jenkins said it stayed with him, that the weight didn't lift just because filming moved on, because once you stand that close to the cross, you don't walk away unchanged. And yet, the hardest part of this story wasn't what they filmed, it was what it might do to the people who watch it. Because if a few leaked moments caused this much reaction, what would happen when the full scene was finally seen? The final cut hasn't been seen yet, not fully, but the people who stood on that hill already know what's coming. They know because it changed them first. Jonathan Roumie has said he doesn't carry the role lightly anymore, not because of recognition, but because of responsibility. To portray suffering without using it, to point toward love without owning it. Dallas Jenkins knows the final episode won't feel like television, not to him, not to the cast, not to many who watch. He said the cross doesn't ask to be explained, it asks to be faced. That's why this story ends without answers, because what happened on that hill wasn't meant to be resolved, it was meant to remain. The silence, the shared meal, the tears that came without warning, those weren't scenes, they were responses. And now the question moves from the set to the viewer. If a group of people who already knew the story were undone simply by remembering it, what happens when you watch it? What happens when art stops being safe and starts asking something of you? Because the most unsettling part of this story isn't that Jonathan Roumie stopped acting, it's that, for a moment, everyone watching forgot how to, and once that line disappears, it doesn't come back easily. The cross is still there, waiting, not for applause, not for understanding, but for a response.